Okay, so tonight we're going to find BitLife.
The New York Times, because basically you're
We're
saying
gonna
that
see
all
what
these
that's all
things, all these
about.
ideas that people love to embrace and talk about and pass on
Let's
are,
see.
if somewhere between bogus and trumped up. For instance, here
Loading.
your chapter titles: playing Mozart's music to
You're
convince boosts
loading.
their intelligence, which you argue it does not. Some people are
Jeez, I'm so
left-brained, others are
tired. I need
right-brained, which you argue and we've
sleepwalking.
argued on the show they are not.
So
Intelligence tests
tired.
are biased
BitLife.
against certain groups of people, which you argue they are not. So my question is what I have to say, and I ask you forgiveness, but it seems as though
Yes.
if most of the pop or modern psychology that most of us know are essentially mythical or anecdotal, stories that you're saying are mostly not true, and that so many of the terms are abused or misused or exaggerated, what are you people good for?
Yeah, exactly. That's not a bad question, actually. Yeah, it's a bit of a double sword because it is
I suppose talking to
so
boy.
intuitively interesting to all of us. And the
Medical
positive side
doctor.
is that we're all psychologists in everyday life. We all know, or at least think we know something
That
about
one.
love and memory and friendships and dreams and things like that. The downside, though, I think
I
that you're
am
getting at is
currently
that
in
because
good health.
something seems familiar, it may
Ooh.
sometimes seem understandable. There's a very hungry, very receptive audience for
Jessica.
focus on positive psychology, emotions, love,
So,
relationships,
baby.
infidelity, dot, 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 dot. That's all good, but the danger, I think, is that we can very easily push our wonder buttons and push our interest buttons using pseudoscience rather than science.
We here at Freakonomics Radio are totally in favor of people pushing their wonder buttons, but we're also in favor of real science. So today on the show, what are some of these misleading, misused, and abused ideas from psychology?
So one that comes to mind is bystander apathy.
And
the biggest error is to assume that these personality traits are unitary. They only have one cause and that they're inherited.
And
one of the most important discoveries in neuroscience of the last few years has been that all that hardwired stuff is completely wrong.
And
a lot of people will say, oh, this job has a really steep learning curve. In fact, they're getting it backward.
From Stitcher and Dubner Productions, this is Freakonomics Radio, the podcast that explores the hidden side of everything. Here's your host, Stephen Dubner.
Scott Lilienfeld of Emory, along with fellow academics Catherine Sovine, Stephen J. Lynn, Robin Cawton, Robert Laxman, and Irvin Waldman, published a paper in Frontiers in Psychology listing 50 terms in their field that are inaccurate, misleading, and so on. It begins with an epigraph from Confucius: "If names be not correct, language is not in accordance with the truth of things." Now, I'm curious, when you write a paper that basically tells your peers and the public, these are all the ways that we're screwing up, does that make you kind of unpopular in the field? Are you thought of as a scold?
Yeah, I always remind my colleagues when they give me a hard time about this, I tell them I've probably misused virtually every single one of those terms at some point myself. I'm as guilty of a lot of these misuses as anybody else.
So the summary of the article says that the goal is to, quote, promote clear thinking and clear writing among students and teachers of psychological science by curbing terminological misinformation and confusion. And then you give 50 commonly used terms that fall into 5 categories, and I'd love you to walk me through the categories.
Yeah, so those are inaccurate or misleading, frequently misused, ambiguous terms, oxymorons, and pleonasms.
So, category 1, inaccurate or misleading. Describe the problem and maybe give an example.
Those are terms that can often lead people into erroneous conclusions. So one that comes to mind is bystander apathy.
Can you tell us what it means, what it represents, and then where it came from?
Absolutely. So what we're referring to here is a fairly well demonstrated psychological phenomenon that in emergencies, say when people are observing someone being robbed or stabbed or raped, what we sometimes see is a very peculiar and sometimes very tragic phenomenon where people freeze and don't do anything. And back in the 1960s, there was a classic series of studies in this regard that was inspired by a real-life tragedy.
Early in the morning of March 13, 1964, a 28-year-old woman named Catherine Kitty Genovese was brutally attacked in Kew Gardens, Queens, which is a relatively quiet community in New York City.
That's James Solomon, the director and producer of a documentary film about that real-life tragedy.
2 weeks later, the New York Times published a story that had originated with the New York police commissioner and a conversation with the then metropolitan editor of the New York Times, Abe Rosenfeld. The police commissioner mentioned many witnesses had watched and heard what had taken place and reportedly had not called police.
Solomon's film is called The Witness. It follows Bill Genovese, Kitty's brother, as he tries to make sense of the killing many years after the fact. How could so many people have failed to intervene?
The New York Times reported on its front page that 38 law-abiding citizens had watched for more than a half hour as this woman, 28-year-old woman, was attacked and murdered.
Apathy was the tagline that Rosenthal gave to the story.
That's Bibb Latané, a social psychologist and senior fellow at the Center for Human Science.
For years after the murder and the headline, 38 watch and no one calls the police, this has been the subject of different movies, lots of television episodes, and countless magazine articles, books, and most of all, I think, in terms of its impact on the country, sermons.
It spoke to the time. President Kennedy had been assassinated. The country was asking, who are we? We're also not many years from the Holocaust, and it was a story that spoke to the thoughts that many had, that there had been many silent, complicit witnesses to what had taken place in